if what Muhammad was preaching about Allah and all the rest of it that found its way into the Koran, if all of this stuff can be found that it is derived from previously existing earthly sources, the gig is up. He's not a prophet. And then he goes on to say, but it looks strange that no argument has been put forward to refute this charge except a mere denial, as if to say, your charge is an impudent lie. You are cruel and unjust to bring such a false charge against our messenger. For the Quran is the word of Allah, who knows all the secrets in the heavens and the earth. End quote. And then if you would underline this paragraph, the question of whether Islam derived its beliefs and ceremonies from heaven or from earth is crucial. If it obtained its God Allah, all of its religious rites running to Mecca, all of them involved in the pilgrimage, the fast, and its doctrines from previously existing pagan religions, then the claim that it was brought down from heaven falls to the ground. See, the people who were living at the time of Muhammad, they knew him. This is the boy that used to be with the camels. We all know him. They knew him. And their reaction, this is a forgery, this is a pack of lies, it's a bunch of stuff he's put together, other people have helped him, and it comes from previously existing material. It is not something that is brand new, never seen before, revealed. Now, how can we start in terms of our questions? Well, number one, we have certain foundational principles. We can all agree, since we're talking about the Allah of the Quran. Now, this is a matter of, again, of logic. The Allah of the Quran is not the same thing as discussing the Allah of the Arabic Bible or the Coptic Church. To discuss those issues, as Badawi did, is called argumentum elence, irrelevant. We're talking about this book. Now, as I picked this book up, and I have read it and reread it for many, many years, I said, where can we all begin that both the Muslim, the Christian, the Jew, the Buddhist, the Hindu, the agnostic, the skeptic, everyone, we can all agree, number one, that we're dealing with literature. Does anyone here really feel that this is a song and not literature? It's a CD, a rap music? No. Number two, our interpretation of the Quran is subject to the same rules of analysis and exegesis that govern any literature. We've got to look at the grammar, the literary context of the paragraph and the passage. You have to also look at the historical and cultural context of this book. Now, I know there are those who say that it fell out of heaven complete. But there are those of us who say there's a historical and cultural context that is very earthly to this book. And this book cannot be explained except you go to Earth's history instead of trying to climb into heaven. Thirdly, one literary rule is that when a book refers to people, places, things, or gods which are nowhere explicitly defined in a book, it's because the author is assuming that the readers would already know about such things. I just sent off my 31st book to the publisher. Now, let's say in the book I referred to New York City. Now, did I give a map showing where New York City? Did I explain the Big Apple? Did I tell people it's a city on the East Coast? No. Well, I'm assuming that when I say New York City, anyone who reads that book would know where New York City is. The same way with the Quran, it refers to many, many things, including Allah, which it is assumed that the listeners, the readers, already know about these things. Number 6, there are many passages in the Quran which would be unintelligible if we did not go to history. You can take, for example, the surah about the blind man. What's this about? What blind man? What's his name? What's the occasion? What's the big deal? Well, it was this blind beggar and this, that. You have to go to history. So how does Yusuf Ali introduce that surah? By going to the contemporary culture. The elephant. Why is a surah entitled The Elephant? Well, if you don't know a little bit of history and about the army and the elephants and the wars, and If you don't understand that, you don't understand what it's talking about. Don't have a clue. This is why Yusuf Ali and others give you footnotes. This is the Schofield Bible of the Islamic world. And you see the footnotes, sometimes there's more of them on the page than there are Quranic verses. Why? Because you have to do a lot of explaining, because the Quran cannot stand alone because it would be unintelligible. Number 7, this is why all scholars, I don't care if they're Muslim, Christian, Jewish, or atheist, they all make recourse to history to explain things in the Quran. Eighthly, what kind of literature is the Quran? We've said, well, it's literature. Well, what kind is it? Is it rational discourse? Are we reading something from Immanuel Kant here? No. We are told in Surah 12 and verse 3, we relate to you the most pretty stories in what we reveal to you in this Quran. If you took a pair of scissors and you went through the Quran and you cut all the stories out, stories about Abraham and Nimrod and all, if you cut all the stories out, you don't have much left, people. It is primarily composed of stories, pretty stories, beautiful stories, another translation. Now, we have a right to ask, where did these stories come from? Were they brought down from heaven? Something revealed they were eternally true on a table stone? Or were these old myths and legends that already existed before Muhammad was ever born? These are traditions and legends that Arabs, Jews, Persians, Christians, all of these things. Well, you see, the source of the stories become very important. Now, does it come as a great surprise to anyone who reads the Quran? It is filled with many, many stories which can be traced back, indeed, to various earthly legends, myths, and traditions. Now, if you look there on page 5, you find a partial list of what Yusuf Ali does. And just to show you how, I just gave you a few. If you look in Surah 2, I have down there verse 60, that as you look in the footnotes for these passages, I'll turn there, for example, Surah 2. And just reviewing my notes to make sure that I try to get my citations right. Now, sometimes I will be wrong, you will be wrong, we're all wrong, but that's not an ad hominem, that's not a moral problem, that's eyesight. It's typing 2 o'clock at night or something. Here in Surah 2, verse 60, where it says, therefore the 12 springs, and he goes and talks about a local tradition known by the Arabs and the Jews and on down the line. Then I notice, well, look, I missed some. There you go, later on, and you see you should write in verse 67 and verse 72. Once again, for example, here, this must have been a Jewish tradition about a whole fishing village in a seaside town which persisted in breaking the Sabbath and were turned into apes. And this is the monkey man story, where a whole village of people, you know, were turned into monkeys. Now, Darwin had monkeys to men, the Quran has men to monkeys. Now, what Yusuf Ali is saying is that this story can be found in these ancient legends. And this just gives you an example of how here's a Muslim who is unimpeachably sincere. As he goes through the Quran, the sources of the Quran are not heavenly but earthly, which is important. Now we begin our general questions with this introduction. Number 1, and these are common sense. The first are just common sense. Is it possible to believe that you are worshiping the true God when you're actually worshiping a false God? Yes, of course. The Muslims turn to me and say, you're worshiping a false God, Dr. Morey. When you worship the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, you're worshiping a false God. You sincerely worship a false God, but you're wrong. And the Christian says, you are sincerely worshiping a false God. Dr. Badawi, Allah's a false God, that's all. But it is possible to be sincere and fervent and be wrong. Secondly, do most religions have sacred books which claim that the gods, or goddesses revealed in their books are true? Yes. I mean, if someone came to you, hi, I'm here representing the religion of Halaban, and we believe in false gods, and we have false prophets and false scriptures, and I am going to ask you to join our religion. Would you like to have a false god today? Does any religion run around saying it has a false god? No, they all say we have true gods. Does merely claiming that you worship the true God prove that you are in fact worshiping the true God? No. You can claim anything you want. You can claim you're a tree plant, planted in a pot. That don't prove anything. Is it possible that the Koran could be an error and thus Allah be a false God? Yes, it's possible. Does the Koran claim that Allah is the true God? Yes, it does. I've never said that it didn't. So when some says, we're going to have a debate, a dialogue, we will discuss whether Allah, according to the Koran, is God, Dr. Morey will be saying, what? I agree. There's no debate on that. Everybody read it. Does the Koran claim that Allah is the true God? Morey's official answer, yes. I've always said that. Now, is it possible that Islam derived the name Allah from pre-Islamic sources? Yes, it is possible. It's possible that it got it from being a pagan god. Now, these are just simple, common sense questions that go across the board. A Christian has to face these. A Jew, everybody must face these things. Specific questions. Does the Quran define the word Allah? In most of its discussions, particularly as it relates to when the pagans are being addressed, no. And that's why you will see many citations from encyclopedias. And I'm glad you brought up these books because we will have fun looking at these books. The answer is the authors of the Quran assumed that the readers were already familiar with the word Allah, that it wasn't going to be something new. It wasn't shocking. Now, does the Quran assume that its readers had already heard? Yes. Should we look into pre-Islamic Arabian history to see who this Allah was before Muhammad? Yes. Again, the sources of the Quran must be traced historically back. According to Muslim traditions, was Muhammad born into a Christian family, a Christian tribe? Did he grow up in a home where he was told that God loved him, Jesus died for him, and he had assurance of salvation? No. He lived his life in fear. There was a strong wind. He got frightened if there was an eclipse. He was worried about the end of the world. If he went to the bathroom, he was afraid the spirits would come in through the holes in his body. And oh my, there's no evidence in the hadith to indicate to us that he knew anything about the wonderful story of redemption and how that God really loved him and Christ cared for him. Instead, he was not born into a Christian home. So whatever God he worshiped as a pagan, born in a pagan family, when he used the word Allah, he was not referring to the triune God of the Christians. If you were a Christian back in the 7th century, you believed in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The proof is the Quran denies the Trinity. Obviously, they understood Christians worship the Trinity, so they go ahead and deny it. So Muhammad did not believe for one moment that the Allah that he was worshiping was this Christian triune God. Now, was he born into a Jewish family? No, not at all. I'm one of those who do not believe that the Arabs are the descendants of Ishmael. Even in the book that one of the Muslims has written against me, he checked it out and he said it's true. In the pre-Islamic genealogies, Ishmael is never mentioned as the father of the Arab people. It is a fraud. So they're not part of Abraham's religion, Abraham's tribe. They're not part of Ishmael. They're not part of that biblical family at all. The roots can be found elsewhere. I give you that. Well, what religion was his family? Every Muslim scholar I've ever talked to said, well, he grew up in a pagan home. His father died a pagan. What was his name? Well, Abdullah. Ab is slave or servant, and Allah. Now here we have a pagan man who has Allah, and he's a pagan. And he's the daddy. And he died a pagan. He died before Muhammad was called, so he couldn't have been a Muslim in that sense. Did Muhammad participate in the pagan ceremonies of Mecca? Of course he did. He went 7 times around the Kaaba. He went and did this, and he fasted, and he snorted water in and out, and shaved his head, and did all these things, which are the pagan ceremonies of. He did, of course he did. Matter of fact, what is a little disconcerting, and you will find Yusuf Ali puts this in a footnote, even after he renounced paganism, Muhammad continued to worship at the pagan temple with the 360 idols still there. And he commanded his followers, the command to go and to do the pilgrimage was said, according to Yusuf Ali, while Mecca was still a pagan center. So the Muslims were joining a crowd that was already circulating, worshiping the pagan religion of that time. Did the Arabs in pre-Islamic times worship 360 gods? Well, if we believe the Hadith, yes it did. Now again, did the pagan Arabs particularly love moon worship? Were they part of the astral religion? Now Yusuf Ali, page 18 through 19, through 1623, I give you the quotes, you look it up. He talks about the pagan religions during the time of Muhammad, and notice what he says. It will be noticed that the sun and the moon and the 5 planets, now if you count sun, moon, and 5 planets, what do you end up with? 7. How many times did they run around that Kaaba? 7. Many scholars say you must understand they were doing it for astrological reasons, the pagans, as they went around 1 time for the sun, 1 time for the moon, and 5 times for the planet, the stars. He goes on to say that the 5 planets got identified with a living deity, god or goddess, with the qualities of its own. Moon worship was equally popular in various forms. It may be noted that the moon was a male deity in ancient India. It was also a male deity in ancient Semitic religion. And the Arabic word for the word moon, gamar, is of the masculine gender. On the other hand, the Arabic word for the sun is of the feminine gender. The pagan Arabs evidently looked upon the sun as a goddess and the moon as a god. If Wad and Suva represented man and woman, they might well represent the astral worship of the moon and the sun as the man and the woman, the husband and the wife. The pagan deities best known in the Kaaba round about Mecca were Lat, Uz, and Manat. We know them as the daughters of Allah. They were all female goddesses. Now, people say to me, Dr. Morey, you're mean, you're cruel, that you bring up the moon god when you're trying to explain this. Yusuf Ali brings up the moon god when he's explaining the Quran. That's why in footnote 5798 on page 1644, when the Quran swears by the moon, it doesn't say by Allah, it says, yea, verily, by the moon, I get curious. Why are they swearing by the moon? Here's his footnote. The moon was worshipped as a deity in times of darkness, end quote. So you will have to refute Yusuf Ali. You will have to refute all of the Muslim scholars who say, in order to understand this book, the Quran, you must look at the pagan religion surrounding it to understand what went on and why what is today. Next question. Did the Arabs build temples to the moon god in Arabia? Yes. All you have to do is trot over to the library. You can pick up Gertrude Thompson's book, or better yet, Wendell Phillips has a tremendous book, pictures of a huge moon temple. Now, did Arab tribes give the moon god different names/titles? Now, this is another logical fallacy that Dr. Badawi did. You cannot read back into ancient times fine linguistic distinctions made today. That's why one book will say Allah's a name, one encyclopedia, another encyclopedia will say it's a title. A name is a title and a title is a name. Sometimes authors use one word as opposed to the other for nothing more reason than simply they like it. So we're not going to fight over that issue. The thing is that the moon god was worshipped by the Arabs. They built huge temples. According to the sources, the most prominent deity in Arabia was the moon. Matter of fact, in Gesenius's Hebrew and Chaldee dictionary, lexicon, under his entry for the Hebrew word for moon, he refers to the Arabs as, quote, the children of the moon, end quote, because of their love of the moon god. So we know that they did it. The archaeologists, we have stone inscriptions, we have the temples, we've got the whole schmear. Now, what were some of the names and titles? Well, Sin. That's the wilderness of Sin, the Sinai. I think it's an appropriate joke of God that the major pagan god of the Arabs, the moon god, his name was Sin. And of course, Christians know that sin is not something good. It's bad. And here is the wilderness of the moon god. And you have Sin, you also have Hubble. Hubble was predominantly sort of the personal name and the personal idol of the moon god. There's another one, Wendell Phillips brings up a huge temple, and he found carved Elumqua. I don't know how to pronounce it. I don't pretend to know Arabic, so don't put me down for Arabic, and I won't put you down for English. And whatever, how you pronounce it. And also, you'll see many, many scholars say Ali-La was one of the names or titles because it simply meant the great god who was the moon god. Now, you must remember, I'm a reporter. I do the best that I can to report to you what are in the scholarly reference works. Now, was the word Allah derived from Ali-La? And Dr. Badawi even read several citations which stated that. I give you some more, and the answer is that's the best guess. Allah came from Ali-La, meaning the God, not the one and only God, but the chief honcho, the big cheese, numero uno, the top of the pile. And it evolved to Allah. Now, was the pagan Allah a high God? Now, notice, underline the word a and the small g, because as you read these reference works, and I give you 39 citations, they'll often put the small g. And even when the Muslim will say, yeah, but here it says that Allah was the high God, they don't notice it has a small g. The author's trying to indicate to you it's a pagan deity. We're not talking about true God here. Was this pagan deity, who was a high God, worshipped at the Kaaba? Yes, he was. Was Allah only one of many Meccan deities? The answer is yes. Did they place a statue of the moon god Hubble? One reference work says on top of the Kaaba, another says inside, but there was a statue there. Yes, and they even describe it in your histories. I got the Book of Idols, found that at the Library of Congress, which goes, it's a famous Muslim work, going into all the idols that were worshipped by the Muslims, male and female statues, things of that nature. And the answer is yes. And at that time, was Hubble considered the moon god? Yes. Was the Kaaba the house of the moon god, and he was the chief deity, the one before whom they would even stand and pray using the word Allah? Well, according to these sources, that's what they're saying. Did the name Allah eventually replace that of Hubble as the name of the moon god? They dropped Hubble and just began to talk about Allah. It looks like that's what some of the Arabs were doing. Did they call the Kaaba the house of Allah? Yes, just as they had viewed it with being the house of Hubble, the moon god. Did the pagans develop religious rites in connection with the worship of their gods? Yes, they did. Did the pagans practice the pilgrimage? Did they go on pilgrimage to Mecca? Yes. Did they practice a fast? Yes. And when they got with the pilgrimage, did they run around the Kaaba 7 times? Yes. Did they kiss this black stone? Yes. Did they shave their heads? Do animal sacrifices? They run up and down these 2 hills. There was an idol here and an idol here. Matter of fact, when the Koran refers to running up and down, that Muslims must run up this hill and down that hill, it gives you the names, but it doesn't explain why they have to run up and down those 2 hills in reference to. The idols are gone. And again, I'm not saying that Muslims say, oh, I'm worshiping the moon god. No, they don't know that. Just as much as Christians, if they're dead wrong, think that we're worshiping an idol when we worship the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. You can be sincerely wrong, but it's no reason to attack motives and character. Did the pagans throw stones at the devil? Did they snort water in and out of their nose? Did they pray several times a day toward Mecca? Did they give alms? Was Friday, as opposed to Saturday for the Jews, Sunday for the Christians, did the pagans choose Friday as their religious day? Yes. These were things that Muhammad grew up with. Come on, let's go, time to go. And off he would go, and he would participate in these things. Now, did Muhammad command his followers to participate in these pagan ceremonies while the pagans were still in control of Mecca? Now imagine, you've got a herd of pagans running around this building. The Muslims blended in with the pagans, and they ran around as one crowd. Well, yes, they did. Yusuf Ali, footnote 223, page 80. Now, were Allat, Al-Uzza, and Manat called the daughters of Allah? Yes, they were. You even find this Yusuf Ali, footnote 5096, page 1445. There they're referred to as the daughters of God. Now, did the Koran at one point tell Muslims to worship or to view Allat, Al-Uzza, and Manat as intercessories? I believe that it did. In Surah 53, 19 through 20. Were these verses later abrogated out of the present Quran? Yes. What are they called? They're called the satanic verses. So your great debater, Tabari, and then other writers simply refer to the satanic verses where Muhammad was in a situation in Mecca and he weakened, and the pagans were going to worship Allat, Al-Uzza, Manat, and he said, well, okay, they're great. And he basically tried to make up with them. Later, he said, Satan had put it into my mouth. We take it out. It's been abrogated. Now, was the crescent moon an ancient pagan symbol of the moon god throughout the ancient world? Now, he didn't address himself to that because he'll have to admit that that's true. Everybody knows that. I'm in the process with a major publisher of doing a full-length, full-color of all the ancient moon idols and symbols of pre-Islamic, ancient, not only but in Turkey and on down the line. Were stars used as pagan symbols along with the crescent moon? And were these stars viewed as the daughters of Allah? Yes, they were. Do the Jews or the Christians of Arabia use the crescent moon with several stars next to it as symbols of their faith? No, they don't. Did Islam adopt the pagan symbol of the moon and the stars as its religious symbol? And I will correct that. A good man does. I will put down, you can correct that for me. I don't have a pencil. Do many, if not most, Muslims view the crescent moon, you know, the green crescent ambulances, and while you can point to a few flags that don't have it, I think probably there's more flags that do than don't, and sitting on top of all the mosques and stuff. But did it get adopted? Not by Jews, not by Christians. Any of you ever been in a Christian church with the crescent moon on top of the steeple? I don't think so. You find that in a mosque. Is it, as Islam developed over the centuries, did it adopt pagan names, pagan ceremonies, pagan temples, pagan on down the line? Yes, it did. It sort of assimilated them. As they would conquer a civilization, they would sort of assimilate it. Is it possible that most Muslims do not know the pagan sources of the symbols and rites of their own religion? Yes. Are they shocked to find out the true sources of their ceremonies and stories and even of their God? Yes. Can Islam be the religion of Abraham if it is derived from paganism? No. What then is Islam? Islam is an ancient fertility cult that has evolved and absorbed many different strains. It took a lot of the Talmudic stories, so there's a Jewish strain, there's Christian elements in it, there's Zoroastrian, there's many different things you can find in the Quran, a blend. Is the Allah of the Quran the Christian God of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit? No. Do the Jews, I know many rabbis, I asked them and they said, no, we do not view that Allah is our God too. Then whose God is Allah? It's the God of Islam. Islam did not come from a Christian home, but from a pagan home. Now, these are simple questions. And again, let me clarify, I am not saying that the Koran says Allah's a moon god. So don't waste another 30 minutes on that point. I'm not saying that Muslims sincerely, knowingly worship the moon god. I don't believe that. I'm not saying that Muslims worship the daughters of Allah. There was a big shouting and they carried on in Toronto. And I kept saying, no, I'm not saying that. Would you please quiet down and listen? I'm saying before Muhammad was born. Now this means that we are dealing with pre-Islamic history. Has everyone got that straight? This means it is irrelevant as to what the word Allah may mean to you or to me today, November 9th, 1996. When you're trying to discern a historical question, you don't run over to Webster's dictionary. You don't, and for example, with the word Allah, Farrakhan says he's Allah. As a matter of fact, Elijah Muhammad, one of his books, says all black people are Allahs, and he put it in the plural. Now, obviously, the word Allah can be used in different senses, having different meanings for different people. In logic, we learn a very simple lesson. A formal fallacy is when you assume that just because someone uses the same word that you're using, they understand that word the same way that you understand it. So that as we begin to look at the resources, and I have given you the documentation which you can read, the following citations reveal that there's a general consensus among Islamic scholars that Allah was a pagan deity before Islam developed. He was only one god among a pantheon of 360 gods worshipped by the Arabs. Even if he was at that time viewed as a high god, this does not mean he was the only true god. And I was glad to see in one of the citations presented by Dr. Badawi, it simply means out of 360 pagan gods that he grew up with, Muhammad said, we're going to keep this one. All the others, you got to go. Get rid of his wife, get rid of his kids. All the others are shirk, that's idolatry. The one left is the pagan Allah that he grew up with, that his father's name was derived from. That was the god of the house of the Kaaba. So it began as a pagan deity, and it ended a pagan deity. Thus, I leave with this conclusion. Just because you believe in one God and someone else believes in one God, does that mean you have the same God? Or could you have different gods in view? Just as much if someone on Mount Olympus said, oh, there's Zeus and Athena, but I declare Zeus is the true God, universal God. All the other gods and goddesses got to go. Does that mean that Christians and Jews are worshiping Zeus? Just because this guy says this Greek god is the true No. I don't know how you're going to do in your 10 minutes to present your proof for Allah that he exists. You spent your 50 minutes responding to me. You didn't respond to the citations I have given everyone here.
Dr. Morey says that I'm some type of prophet by saying something that he hasn't said already. Yes, I'm not a prophet, Dr. Morey, but I read your book and read your work. What do you expect me to wait until you make your presentation to make my first presentation? Yeah. Number one, I offered that format, but you didn't accept. Number two, you talked about me speaking about you, Dr. Morey. No, I'm not talking about you personally. I'm talking about what I perceive to be your gross misunderstanding and the big questions about the scholarly nature of the material that you present to prove your point. Number three, you talk about this thigh. Here is your own transparency, if you look just above, then the word thigh appear without any white paper or ink to make it thing instead of thigh. And here is my copy also of the same hadith, Dr. Morey. How could you have escaped? This is mine here, where the term thigh appeared twice. And if you look in Bukhari, you'll find the caption also is thigh, not thing, and even thing does not quote penis. So I think it's a serious matter of correct, honest quotation, not personal, correct, academically honest scholarship. Furthermore, you brushed aside and you never responded, Dr. Morey, of the 11 hadiths that you said the Prophet held his sword and cut the moon into half. You brushed it aside. You never addressed it. These are two of the hadiths that you quote in your book. Can anyone tell me where is the word sword? Can anyone tell me where the Prophet says eyes, or somebody say the Prophet split the moon? I have more, but that will be forthcoming later. Okay. Another point that you raised, that you say that as an evidence that Muslims worship the moon god is that God swears by the moon. If you have read the Quran so many times as you claim, Dr. Morey, you must have seen that Allah swears by many of his creatures. And the swearing of God is different from the swearing of the human. When the human swear, he swears by something greater than he is. But God has every right in Islamic theology to swear by any of his creatures. It is not the same kind of swearing. You would find in the Quran, Dr. Morey, God swears by the moon, by the sun, by nafs, by the soul that he created, by the night, by the day, and also fala wa rabbika, by your Lord. This is very much found in the Quran. It has absolutely no significance and no relevance to any paganistic notion whatsoever. Number one. Another point. You're basing a lot of argument about the so-called historical basis of what Muslim worship is. I challenge you, brotherly, Dr. Morey, to tell me where in any quotation were Muslims instructed to worship an idol. I challenge you before everyone. You made that statement earlier, unless you take it back. There is absolutely no place in the Quran or in the 9-volume hadith that you claim to have read that ever said to Muslims to worship any idol. In fact, the Quran from A to Z is nothing but condemnation of idols. And let me make another correction, Dr. Morey. It is true that the Arabs might have worshipped 360 idols, but for your information, Allah was not one of them. Allah was not one of those statues. This is a major error. It's a question of scholarship, not a question of personal attack. You're totally wrong and off track on that particular point. Furthermore, as I indicated earlier, I spoke plainly, I hope, but I don't know whether Dr. Morey was paying attention. I said the Arabs did not believe in these as gods. They believed in the one true God of all, but they simply believed that these are intercessors with God. So that was not intermediary. It's not, he took one and canceled 359. That is totally incorrect and out. Furthermore, you keep claiming, Dr. Morey, that Islam must have pagan origins because in Islam there is pilgrimage, there is fasting, there is circumambulation around the Kaaba and all of these. But apparently you choose your history and stop at the point that is convenient to you, Dr. Morey. Why don't you carry history to its logical conclusion, whether you believe or not that Ishmael settled in Arabia, but tell me where Ishmael and his children settled. You go to Sinai, they're not settled in Sinai. It is well known historically. Tradition goes back long before the birth of Prophet Muhammad that the Arabs are descendants of Ishmael. There's no question about that. There's no argument around it. If you can prove conclusively that this is not the case, I'll buy it, but you can't prove that conclusively. When you have traditions for centuries and somebody wants to rewrite history on his own and to his own liking, then which issues to accept? But all this fallacious argument, in fact, is based on one false assumption, that history stops at the pagans and Islam just continued those pagan practices. This is not so, and I did say that earlier also. I said earlier that monotheism was known to the Arabs through Abraham, through his son Ishmael and their descendants. Monotheism was not new to them. The term Allah was not new to them. And you forgot to refer or comment even, Dr. Morey, in your whole 50-minute presentation about the quotation I got from Western authorities that Allah is coming from Aramaic. It is part of the Hebrew. It is the equivalent of Yahweh and Jehovah. How could we transform that all of a sudden into pagan God unless we also make the same claim or assertion for the Bible? Now, given the fact that the Islam or the monotheism started with Abraham, the riots that you see in Mecca today are not continuation of paganism, but restoration of the correct way of doing pilgrimage. These were practices that were done by Ishmael, by Abraham, and it was perverted by the Arabs. Islam did not come to imitate them, but to restore the correct way of pilgrimage. In fact, this responds to your question about Ishmael being settled in Arabia. Why do Muslims run between the two hillocks of Safa and Marwa? If you've read enough in Hadith, you would know, Dr. Morey, that this simulates the running of Hagar, the mother of Ishmael, between the two hills in search for water. If you say why Muslims drank from the well of Zamzam, because that was the well that miraculously gushed with water under crying baby Ishmael. If you ask why Muslims go around the Kaaba, it is because it is the first house on earth built by Abraham to worship the one true God. The fact that the Arabs put statues is Muslims wanted to assert the right until it was restored and cleansed, but not to worship the idols. It was the restoration of the same kind of circumambulation. If you're asking why do Muslims throw stones in the procedures of pilgrimage, then if you studied enough, Dr. Morey, before writing books like this, you would know that these are the three places where Satan appeared to Abraham to dissuade him from sacrificing his son Ishmael, and Abraham threw the stones at him. So it symbolizes victory over satanic temptation. If you're asking why Muslims continue the practice of sacrificing animals, it is not because they imitated the pagan Arabs, but because this simulates the willingness of Abraham to sacrifice his only beloved son at that time, because Isaac was not even born, at Mina. So all of the evidence that you're presenting, Dr. Morey, goes back against you, because it does prove that this has connection with the story of Hagar and Ishmael. And then you raised another issue to say that the Prophet hated questions and the Quran say that you should not ask questions. Again, Dr. Morey, I'm sorry to say that you're quoting totally out of context. Don't take anything that Dr. Morey or I say for granted. Go and check it. And quite frankly, with the track record that I have seen of Dr. Morey's quotation, I would have tons of salt for any quotation or reference that he make unless I go and check it, and I did discover dozens of this kind of distortions. Let me be very frank and open on this issue. If you go to the ayah and read it from the beginning, لا تسألوا عن أشياء إن تبد لكم تسؤكم وإن تسألوا عنها حين ينزل القرآن لكم تبد لكم عفى الله عنها. The context of this ayah is that some people kept coming at the Prophet asking very little detailed thing about what is permissible or not. The Prophet wanted to tell them that, look, don't keep asking what is permissible. If Allah has forbade certain animals like pig meat or whatever, that's it. Don't keep and come ask me, can I eat hamburger? Is pizza all right? Don't keep asking this. And أصبحوا بها كافرين. It's not like you say, Dr. Morey, because you don't understand Arabic and the language of the Quran. Kafirin here not lost their faith. This is a mistranslation, even if a Muslim make that translation. Kufr in Arabic means actually rejection. That means some people in the past, means the Israelites, kept asking about certain things, but when they were told to do it, they did not do it. So it has absolutely no relevance whatsoever to the kind of conclusion that you're arriving at, Dr. Morey. The same thing when the Prophet was asked questions. You added your own words. That is not what the text of the hadith, and I've read the hadith that you're referring to. I'm not speaking from vacuum, Dr. Morey. I have the 9 volumes also as well. It doesn't say that. It says that some people kept asking the Prophet for so many details. And in one instance, even in another hadith, it says one person came and asked him, who is my father? He answered him. Another said, but who is my father? The Prophet got angry, not because he was asking him about his prophethood or qualities, but suppose that man was illegitimate child. What benefit to keep asking? This happened in the days of Jahiliyyah, that's before Islam, so why keep dwelling on this? I'd like to conclude actually by saying I didn't hear anything really that Dr. Morey has said that really make any rebuttal. And I must say that this issue of the moon split is not an eyesight or copying something 2 o'clock in the morning, because you added something simply which is not there. You put it 11 hadiths, none of which mention that. It is not a mistake of an eyesight for sure.
You will once again notice that the topic was Bob Morey, not Allah, not the Quran, which is argumentum alince. Let me just point out, because up in Toronto they had a penis fixation as well. He circled the word thigh. Keep reading. Do you find the word thing? Raise your hand if you see the word thing. Raise your hand. The whiteness of the what? The thing. Now up in Toronto, Dr. Morey's a liar. It does not say thing, it says thigh. And he put only the first part. Who is common whom? I saw the whiteness of the thing. Now I said, look, I don't pretend to know Arabic. All I know is that's what the Muslims did in their translation. I've got the book over here. I will give you $100 if you look right in Bukhari. If it doesn't say thing, I will give you $100. No, my copy's right there. It's green. Muhammad Khan, Lahore. All I'm saying is this. They made a big whoop-a-doo, and it means nothing. If you take your common logical fallacies made by Muslims, you have heard tonight all 10 of them. Number one, the fallacy of false assumption. Badawi assumes what he has yet to prove, that the Quran is the word of God and that Allah's God. He has yet to prove that. Secondly, he argues in a circle. He proved Allah by the Quran, and then he proves the Quran by Allah. I can prove my dog is a prophet by that method. When you argue in a circle, it's like rowing with one oar. It means nothing. You can't prove Muhammad by the Quran and then the Quran by Muhammad. You can't prove Islam by the Quran and then the Quran by Islam. There's also the false analogy that is used, and he would try to compare Christianity and Islam, the God of Christians, the God of Islam. This is a false analogy. Number four, the fallacy of irrelevance. The Allah of the Quran is the subject of the dialogue, not the Allah of Arabic-speaking Christians, not this or that issue. There is a formal fallacy that's involved, the use of the term. We also have the Christians who use the symbol of the cross. That is irrelevant to the issue. I have never said that Muslims worship the crescent moon. That's another false argument. When Muslims attack the character and motives of anyone who criticizes Islam, they're using irrelevant arguments. The character of the person is no indication of whether he's telling you the truth. This thing with the thing and the thigh and the penis and all of that is simply a smokescreen so you people don't see what's going on. The issue is Allah and the Quran, not the color or the size of Muhammad's penis. Also, if you continue to look, the present meaning of a word, page 4, irrelevant. The present meaning of a word is irrelevant to what it meant in ancient times. I don't care how many dictionaries you bring up that tell me what the word means now. We're talking archaeology. We're talking before Muhammad. There's the fallacy of equivocation. We do not share the same understanding of God, Jesus, revelation, inspiration, prophet, miracle. All of those things are totally different. My God is not your God. Your Jesus is another Jesus. The New Testament says if anyone says that Jesus is not the Son of God, he's Antichrist. So Muhammad is Antichrist according to 1 John chapter 2. The same thing when you think that the word Allah has only one meaning, that's a fallacy. It has many different meanings, and I illustrate it. There's also, number 7, the fallacy of confusing questions of fact with questions of relevance. I have demonstrated, and the sources will prove, that Muhammad grew up in a pagan home worshiping a pagan deity who was called Allah. Now, that they worship the moon god is also clear. As to whether or not it's relevant, and this is a question of fact, he said that I had no right to bring up the moon god. Now, this is Yusuf Ali. Here it is, Surah 74:32. Here's his footnote. The moon, next after the sun, is the most striking luminary to our sight. Its reflected light has for us even a greater mystery than the direct light of the sun, which looks to us like pure fire. The moon was worshipped as a deity in times of darkness. So no, I'm not crazy for bringing up the moon god in order to explain the Quran. You find this in your Schofield kind of reference work. You also have red herring arguments, number 9. When a Muslim is asked to defend the Quran, if he turns around and attacks the reliability of Bob Morey and his books, the Trinity, the deity of Christ, the Crusade, he's really introducing irrelevant issues, has no bearing. This is the key. He is assuming that if he can refute poor old Bob Morey, and I'm not Billy Graham. Some of you know Billy Graham. I ain't Billy Graham. This means he can refute me one side up and another, but does that prove that Allah's God? No. Does it even prove that my arguments are invalid? No. All it proves is a personal vendetta, which is a logical fallacy. The Quran does not win by default. This is why they usually attack the Trinity, the deity, and they think, well, Islam wins. Islam. No, you've got to prove your own book and your own God. Number 10, straw man arguments. You put a false argument into the mouth of your opponent, then proceed to knock it down. That's mainly what you heard tonight. Straw man arguments. You also heard taking me out of context, which another did up in Canada. When I quote a source to prove that the word Allah was a religious term used by the pagans before Muhammad was born, and I quote, let's say, the Encyclopedia Britannica to prove that at this time, that's how it was used, then the guy comes up and says, ah, yes, but the same article talking about today says it means God. That's a chronological fallacy. I'm quoting an article that in the section of pre-Islamic Arabia talks about the pagan God Allah, and then he's quoting about the modern usage as a generic term, and what a generic term means, like the English word God. If I had a box up here, we put the word God, it's empty. You can put anything you want. Some people worship their grandmother, their uncle, the moon, the stars, dogs, Farrakhan, I don't care who it is. You can put anything in there you want because the word means nothing. Generic term means the word is like a rubber band, it can go anything. If you believe the word Allah is a generic term, fine. I have no problem, as I stated in Toronto. If you can say the Nation of Islam can refer and say Wallace Fard is Allah, Elijah Muhammad's Allah, Farrakhan's Allah, all black people are Allahs. If you have no problem with that, then fine. It's a generic term and it means nothing. And I don't object to empty terms that signify nothing. I have yet to see in your 50-minute presentation, you could not defend Allah, you could not defend the Quran, you did not prove the existence of your God. I saw nothing but ranting and raving against me, which is another logical fallacy, bringing in issues like the cross and stuff which are totally irrelevant. And as a professor like you, I have taught logic, and just like you graded me, I would have to give you an F in terms of making every logical fallacy known according to the text marks. So that in the last, if you look on page 10, second quote, Muhammad did not find it necessary to introduce an altogether novel deity, but contented himself with ridding the heathen Allah of his companions, subjecting him to a kind of dogmatic purification. Encyclopedia of Religion and Ethics. Further down, third from the bottom, Allah was known to the pre-Islamic Arabs. He was one of the Meccan deities. Now, Dr. Badawi said he was not one of the Meccan deities. Well, you disagree with the Encyclopedia of Islam edited by Gibb. That's fine. I have no problem. Or you can turn over to page 11. Here again, we have many of these things. Oh, well, up at the top, the source of this Allah goes back to pre-Islamic times. Allah is not a common name, meaning God or a God, and the Muslim must use another word or form if he wishes to indicate any other than his own peculiar deity. Or down at the bottom, the customs of heathenism have left an indelible mark on Islam, notably in the rites of the pilgrimage, on which more will be said later, so that this reason alone something ought to be said about the chief characteristics of Arabian paganism. The relation of this name, and he goes on to say Allah, which is a compound of the indefinite article ilah. Some scholars trace the name to the South Arabian ilah, a title of the moon god. Read it, folks. It's there. Thank you very much.
Okay.